In New Zealand, a typical winter morning begins. The sun rises but suddenly dims for a moment before shining brightly again. This strange flash awakens a man sleeping in his home. At first, he doesn't understand what's wrong, but then he notices the eerie silence, no sound from the radio, no signal on the phone. Despite the unsettling stillness, the man, Zach, gets ready for work and heads out. On his way, he stops at a gas station, but the attendant is nowhere to be found. Then he notices smoke coming from the kitchen. Investigating further, he finds a burnt kettle, but no people. Confused, he checks the street restroom, but it's empty. That's when it dawns on him. He hasn't seen a single person all morning. As he continues driving, he carefully maneuvers around cars abandoned right in the middle of the road. He nearly crashes into a truck abandoned in the middle of the street. He tries using its radio, but there's only silence. The city greets Zach with emptiness. He spots a fire in the distance and rushes to find the burning wreckage of a passenger plane. But there are no bodies, only empty seats. It seems as though every living being, people, animals, disappeared in the space between one tick of the clock and the next. Desperate for answers, Zach goes to the laboratory where he worked before the strange event. The equipment is still running, but there's no communication with any of the world's laboratories. A message on one of the monitors reads, "Operation Flash completed." Then he sees his boss at the control panel. Relieved, he touches his shoulder, but the body slumps forward, lifeless. His boss is dead. Suddenly, an alarm blares. Radiation levels are rising rapidly. Zach realizes the experiment they had been conducting has ended in catastrophic failure. He must escape, but the entrance doors are locked. Thinking fast, he improvises a gas bomb. As he works, he listens to his own recorded notes about the project, which he once described as having phenomenal destructive potential. Today, July 5th, he mutters into the recorder, Zach Hobson, am the last person on Earth. The gas cylinders explode, blasting open the doors. Zach rushes to the other floors, desperately trying to make contact with someone. He sends out a signal with his phone number and writes messages everywhere he can. But the phone remains silent. Determined, he finds a police car and broadcasts his message through the streets. Still no response. After a week of searching, Zach begins to accept his isolation. He moves into a luxurious mansion, loots expensive stores, and roams the empty city. He plays billiards alone, drives trains, and indulges in every pleasure available. But the loneliness starts taking a toll on his mind. One day, he puts on a woman's nightgown and, in a fit of madness, declares himself president of this quiet earth. When the power finally goes out, his sanity snaps. He storms into a church, shoots at a Jesus statue, removes it from the cross, and declares himself God. Then he spots a massive truck. He drives it into the city, destroying everything in his path. At one point, he runs over a baby stroller. Something inside him breaks. Panicked, he jumps out and rushes to the stroller, only to find it empty. Overwhelmed with despair, he places the barrel of a shotgun into his mouth. But at the last second, he stops himself. This moment of near self-destruction snaps him out of his madness. Determined to reclaim his sanity, Zach returns to a normal routine and begins rebuilding his life. Then, one morning, while gathering supplies, he sees something unbelievable, a young woman. She's holding a gun, but instead of shooting, she suddenly throws herself into his arms, overwhelmed with joy at finding another survivor. That evening, she shares her story. She, too, witnessed her loved ones disappear in an instant. Zach confesses his fears to her. Sometimes, he wonders if they're already dead, trapped in another galaxy. As they talk, exhaustion takes over. Joanne, the woman, falls asleep mid-conversation, dozing off on the couch. Afraid to leave her side, Zach drinks champagne all night. In the morning, Zach and Joanne begin exploring the deserted cities together. They stop at a roadside motel, where Joanne suggests they continue searching for other survivors the next day. The following morning, they split up. Joanne heads to one part of the city, while Zach explores another. They keep in touch via radio, agreeing to check in every half hour. But their search turns up nothing. Suddenly, both of them feel a strange pulsation, as if the world itself just shifted. Joanne immediately calls Zach, but before they can make sense of it, everything settles down again. Later, they meet for dinner, where Zach explains the experiment that may have caused this catastrophe. Scientists had been working on a wireless global energy network to power military equipment. He hopes they aren't responsible for the disappearance of all living beings. That night, back at the motel, Zach and Joanne grow closer. As the days pass, they continue exploring the abandoned cities. One day, while Joanne shops in a boutique, Zach suddenly finds himself ambushed. Cars circle the streets around him, and a large truck emerges from an alley, blocking his escape. A masked man steps out, aiming a gun at Zach. Zach, fearing for his life, lies and says he's alone. The man hesitates, then removes his mask, seemingly convinced. But at that moment, Joanne's voice comes through the radio. Realizing his lie, the man tightens his grip on the gun. Under threat, Zach is forced to take him to meet Joanne. When they arrive, Joanne steps out of a boutique, wearing a beautiful new dress. Seeing her, the stranger lowers his gun and smiles. The three embrace, no longer alone in this silent world. That night, they try to understand why they were the only ones left. After much discussion, they find a pattern. At the moment of the event, each of them was experiencing death. Appy had been drowning in a fight with a friend. Joanne was electrocuted due to a faulty hairdryer. Zach had overdosed on pills, feeling guilty about the dangerous experiment. And in those final moments, they all saw a red light. Later, they stop at Appy's house, where he plays the piano for his new friends. That night, Joanne hears singing outside. Curious, she steps out and finds Appy standing at the grave of an elderly woman, softly singing. She watches for a moment, then silently returns inside. A love triangle begins to form, but Zach is more focused on his scientific observations. Meanwhile, Joanne makes a disturbing discovery. Appy killed a friend's wife, which led to their fight. Shocked, she confronts him, but Appy is unapologetic. He simply says it was necessary. He believes he has the right to decide his own actions. Joanne, shaken, refuses to tell Zach what happened. Sensing something is wrong, Zach insists they leave Appy's house immediately. But Appy resists. Why should you make decisions for others? Are you the eldest here? He challenges. Tension rises. Zach accuses Appy of hurting Joanne, but Appy takes his words as racist insults. Furious, Zach storms out, gets into his car, and drives away. But Appy isn't done. He chases after him. Moments later, Joanne also grabs a car and follows them. As the chase intensifies, Appy catches up to Zach and forces his car off the road. Appy comes down to confront Zach, but before the fight escalates, Joanne arrives, grabs a shotgun from Appy's car, and points it at them, tired of their rivalry. At that moment, Zach confesses the truth. He swallowed the pills because he knew the experiment was dangerous. The group continues their journey together. Along the way, Appy struggles to understand how scientists could have allowed such a catastrophe. Zach blames the Americans for withholding crucial data and criticizes others for failing to grasp the full horror that awaited Earth. Eventually, they reach a house where Zach finds computer data predicting another disaster will strike at exactly 6 a.m. the next day. Suddenly, another flicker occurs. For a moment, Appy sees the floor turn into a wall, and Joanne, Zach steps into the street through a transformed corridor, just as reality shifts back to normal. Joanne, shaken, is comforted by Appy, who then blames Zach for miscalculating the event's timing. It already happened, Appy insists. But Zach shakes his head. No, this was just the beginning. Determined to stop the catastrophe, Appy suggests destroying Zach's laboratory. The three, putting aside their personal conflicts, head to an explosives warehouse and load up a truck with enough firepower to obliterate the lab. As they prepare, Zach reminds them that his boss pressed a button that triggered the first cataclysm. But since the anomalies still continue, it must not be about the button itself. Then, he heads straight for the machine. During the drive, Zach asks Joanne, if this works, who would you stay with? Joanne hesitates before admitting, I like you both in different ways. Zach sighs. It feels like you two have known each other for a long time. Like you're both guarding me. Joanne then reveals something shocking. Appy's friend tried to kill him because his wife fell in love with Appy. But Appy rejected her. Unable to handle the heartbreak, the woman took her own life, and Appy blamed himself. Zach is surprised by this unexpected nobility. He gently tells Joanne not to worry about him. She responds by kissing him, and in that distracted moment, they almost crash. Appy, driving the truck loaded with explosives, arrives just in time. Joanne jumps into Appy's truck. Zach follows, but before he can warn them, his radio crackles. A danger alert from the laboratory. He frantically tries to stop the truck, but Appy thinks Zach is just jealous and switches off the radio. Zach fights to get control and finally convinces them to stop. He explains that due to radiation levels, they won't be able to get close enough to destroy the lab completely. Instead, Zach devises another plan. He tells them when the lights in the lab go out, the system will fail. He has a remote control panel that can guide the truck to the perfect detonation spot, but he needs to retrieve it from the city. He leaves. As Zach drives off, he sees Joanne and Appy kissing. Later, after their intimacy, then suddenly, they hear the truck roar to life. To their horror, they see the massive bomb moving toward the lab. Zach realizes Appy deceived them, but it's too late. Zach crashes the truck into the destroyed roof of the laboratory. The structure collapses. The second event occurs. A blinding red light, surrounded by a dark tunnel, swallows everything. When Zach regains consciousness, he is on a beach. Strange cloud formations rise from the ocean, twisting like massive water spouts. Staggering forward, he reaches the shoreline and stares in shock. A huge planet looms over the horizon, surrounded by falling rain. He is alone, the last survivor of the new event. Holding his dictaphone, Zach looks around, lost, confused, and filled with despair. So that's it. Hope you enjoy the story. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more videos.